At Sephora, we've got what you want because you're obsessed with your skin and we're obsessed with what it needs. Sephora has the best products to help you get beautiful, glowing, radiant skin. With an extensive, inclusive range of results-driven formulas and in-store beauty advisors to help you find exactly which are right for you, the best skincare is only at Sephora. Sephora, for all your skincare.
Shopping is hard.
I can never find anything in my size.
I don't even know my size.
I buy my clothes the same place I buy my groceries.
There's a better way. Make it easy with Stitch Fix. Just share your size, style, budget, and done. Your personal stylist sends pieces picked just for you.
That was easy.
Stitch Fix. Online personal styling for everyone. Free shipping and returns. No subscription required. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
Hi, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and you are listening to Military Murder, a show where I discuss crimes committed by our brothers and sisters in arms, both in and out of uniform. Today's case is taking us back in history to the 80s. As I was reading about today's case, I was pretty sure that Myrtle had written the base name down incorrectly, or maybe she was talking about a base in another country. But nope, it was a base right here in the United States. Today, I am taking you back to a base named Bergstrom Air Force Base in Texas. Join me today as I tell you the tragic story of Bergstrom Air Force Base's very first murder, the case of military spouse Cynthia Torres. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Today's case does involve discussions of rape. Listener discretion is advised. In 1942, Del Valle Army Air Base was activated in the city of Austin, Texas. Now, it's Delvalle. It could be Del Valle. It could be Del Valle. I have no idea, so don't come at me. A year later, the base was renamed Bergstrom Field in honor of Captain John Bergstrom, who was the first Austinite killed during World War II. But when the Air Force became its own military service, the base was renamed again to Bergstrom Air Force Base in 1948. The base continued to live on until 1993, when the base was closed and returned to the city of Austin. Well, our story today takes place in the late 1980s on this very base, Bergstrom Air Force Base. Late in the evening of Saturday, February 7th, 1987, 25-year-old full-of-life Cynthia Ann Torres finished her shift at the Non-Commissioned Officers Club on Bergstrom. Cynthia was a cashier at the club and had only been working there for 5 months, but we all know that in military time, that can feel like a year. At around 10 p.m., Cynthia called her husband, 20-year-old Airman First Class Edward Torres, who was at home. She told him that she was running a little behind because she had to go cash a check. After she hung up with her husband, she left the club at around 10:30. And that's when she walked towards her car, which was parked in the first row of the parking lot, but her spot was the farthest from the building. That evening, Edward, Cynthia's husband, was watching the clock while he waited for his wife to get home. He knew that she was going to be a few minutes late, but he didn't think she was going to be that late. But as he looked at the clock, 11 p.m. came and went, and then 11:30 p.m. came and went, and still there was no sign of Cynthia. At that point, Edward was worried, so he jumped in his car and drove to the club to see if he could find his wife. As he approached the parking lot right there at the club at about 11:45 p.m., Edward spotted Cynthia's car right where she had parked it when she first got to work that day. Edward got out of his car to inspect Cynthia's car, and as he peered inside the window, he was horrified. Cynthia was lying on the floorboard of the front seat of the car. She was unconscious and barely breathing, but still alive, but there was blood absolutely everywhere. It was clear that Cynthia had been beaten and it looked like her throat had been crushed. Horrified, Edward could see that his wife's underwear and pantyhose were pulled down mid-thigh. Once first responders arrived, Cynthia was clinging to life and she was taken to the medical group on base, but immediately she was transported to the Breckenridge Hospital in Austin. At the hospital, doctors fought super hard to try to save Cynthia. It was clear that she had been hit in the head with some sort of object. She had also been strangled and her nose was broken. They could tell that Cynthia had fought like hell against her attacker because there was skin wedged underneath some of her fingernails, and the remaining nails that she did have were broken or completely ripped off. Austin Police Department, along with the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, or OSI, jointly investigated this brutal attack. An Austin PD spokesperson told the Austin Statesman, quote, "We believe most of her injuries are in the head and shoulders area," end quote. When asked, the spokesperson refused to disclose the location of the hospital that she was at, citing concern for the victim's safety, especially considering that the perpetrator was still at large. Cynthia lived through her attack, but sadly, after doctors performed a scan, they determined that she didn't have any brain activity. The doctors consulted with Cynthia's father and her husband, who made the heartbreaking decision to remove her from life support. Just 36 hours after Edward discovered his wife bleeding in her car outside of the NCO club, doctors declared 25-year-old Cynthia Torres, mother of two, dead. She was declared dead at noon on February 9, 1987. In its 45-year history, Bergstrom Air Force Base had never had a murder on base. With Cynthia's death, the base now had its first. As police continued their investigation, they didn't have a lot to work with. There were 0 witnesses because this had happened so late in the night. So instead, they had to turn to the physical evidence to try to paint a picture of what happened the night of her attack. As they investigated, it appeared that Cynthia was taken by surprise when she was struck on the side of the head. The blitz attack took place outside of her car, and once she was incapacitated, whoever it was dragged her into her car. After her brutal discovery, Cynthia's car had been towed to a police impound lot where it could be examined. The interior was analyzed and any items of evidentiary value were taken out and cataloged. The blood spatter patterns were studied and measured, and everything was photographed. And from looking at everything, it was clear that the most violent part of the attack took part inside the car. There, police located a bloody shoe print on a window, pubic hairs, and further evidence of a sexual assault. There was semen found on the victim's dress and underwear. They also located a part of a receipt that had a bloody fingerprint on it, and this receipt was inside the car. The receipt was logged into evidence but wasn't closely examined, at least not at first. Investigators initially looked at Edward, Cynthia's husband, as the primary suspect because #the husband did it, right? But Edward was quickly cleared. Cynthia's body was sent to autopsy where it was determined that her cause of death was asphyxiation due to a strangulation. Deep bruises were discovered under her scalp caused by blows to the head coming from both the left and right directions. Underneath the bruising on Cynthia's neck, they discovered major internal hemorrhaging. And this hemorrhaging indicated the degree of force that was used when she was strangled. So 10 days into the investigation, Austin PD homicide investigator Sergeant Dusty Heskew was looking at the physical evidence that was at the scene. He saw the partial receipt that had been logged but had not yet been forensically examined. Besides the bloody fingerprint, which would take days or weeks to process, Sergeant Heskew noticed something else. Right there on the receipt was a name. Gerald Mobley. Was this a lead or what was this? Heskew contacted officials at Bergstrom Air Force Base to see if there was someone named Gerald Mobley stationed there. Air Force personnel looked at all of the people permanently assigned to the base, and they didn't find Gerald on the list. But Bergstrom hosted a leadership school called the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, or NCOA. As reported to me by Myrtle, personnel usually in the grade of Technical Sergeant or E6 must attend NCOA prior to advancement to the rank of Master Sergeant. After contacting the schoolhouse, detectives learned that a tech sergeant named Gerald I. Mobley had in fact been on temporary duty assigned to Bergstrom to attend NCOA, and he was there at the time of Cynthia's murder. Gerald had completed that academy and was back at his permanent duty station, George Air Force Base in California. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money. Because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change, and you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Zysol is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Zysol keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all. Take Zysol. At night.
On February 17th, Sergeant Heskew and Special Agent Brown from Bergstrom's OSI office, they hopped on a plane and traveled to George Air Force Base. George Air Force Base was located about 75 miles northeast of Los Angeles in Victorville. They found Mobley at home where Special Agent Brown read him his rights under Article 31 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's basically equivalent to Miranda rights. Mobley wondered why they were there, and when questioned about Cynthia Torres, Mobley denied having any involvement in her rape and murder. He was like, listen, y'all, I've never even seen this woman. When they confronted him and were like, okay, well, that's weird considering we found a half receipt with your name on it in her car. Well, Mobley again said he didn't know how the receipt would have gotten into her vehicle. Words of denial are one thing, but physical evidence is another. You see, while Mobley wasn't questioned about Cynthia until 10 days after her attack, when Sergeant Heskew and Agent Brown showed up at his house, they spotted something. They could see several scratch marks on Mobley's face and neck. And when they asked him, hey, where did you get those marks from? Mobley quickly claimed that those scratches were from an aggressive game of basketball while he was at NCOA. That's convenient. While in California, the agents obtained permission to search Mobley's home that he shared with his wife. And during the search, they found a leather jacket with blood smears on the jacket sleeve. They also located a shoe with a virtually identical sole pattern as that found on the window of Cynthia's car. And then they found a missing piece to this entire puzzle. They, no kidding, found the other part of the receipt with Mobley's name on it. You know, the other part of the receipt that they found at the actual crime scene. Now, what are the odds of that? It was enough evidence for Mobley to be taken into custody. Agent Brown and Sergeant Heskew transported Mobley to Edwards Air Force Base, another base in California, where he was held in pretrial confinement. Mobley remained at Edwards until February 24th when he was transported to Bergstrom, and then he was formally charged on February 25th. As soon as they had all the evidence, forensics got to work comparing what they found at Mobley's residence with the evidence collected from Cynthia's body, clothing, and the car. The investigative team questioned classmates who attended NCOA with Mobley, and none of the people that played basketball with Mobley remembered him being scratched while they were playing. Furthermore, the NCOA classmates had pictures from a barbecue that occurred earlier before Cynthia was attacked. And when they went back to those pictures of February 7th during the day, Mobley didn't have a single scratch on him. And then one of Mobley's classmates dropped a bombshell. He told investigators that Mobley had actually met Cynthia at the NCO club. This completely contradicted what Mobley said to them, that he had never met Cynthia in his entire life. Turns out that not only did Mobley know Cynthia, but the classmates said that Mobley met her on more than one occasion. And Mobley made it clear that he thought Cynthia was cute and he wanted to have sex with her. As the investigation continued, the lab determined that the semen found on Cynthia's clothing was from someone who was known as a non-secretor. So you might remember back a few years ago when I covered Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper. An early suspect named Ed Humphrey in that case was identified back then, but he was determined to be innocent because he was a non-secretor, and the evidence left at the Gainesville Ripper scenes was from a secretor. Later, they captured Danny Rolling, who was also a secretor. Basically, a non-secretor is a person who does not secrete their blood type antigens into blood fluids like saliva, mucus, and semen. Now, this secretor, non-secretor thing, like I said, was a big thing before forensics, before DNA testing, because blood type matching was used extensively to determine a match to body fluids. Today, they can get a DNA profile from a non-secretor. So back in 1987, the best they could do during this investigation was try to match a non-secretor to a non-secretor. A saliva sample was taken from Mobley himself, and guess what? He was a non-secretor. It wasn't totally damning evidence because probably 50% of the population was a non-secretor, but investigators also took a blood sample from him that matched the same type of blood that was found inside the car. More testing showed that the blood found on the sleeves of that leather jacket found at Mobley's house matched Cynthia's blood type. Cynthia had a very rare blood type that was only found in 1 of every 350 people. The shoe they found in Mobley's closet closely matched the shoe print that was found on the inside window of Cynthia's car. Since ABO blood typing was the existing science they had to work with in 1987, forensics noted that the victim and the suspect did not share a blood type, adding further proof, again at the time, that they had the right person in custody. Pubic hair gathered at the scene were microscopically compared to Mobley's and determined to be a match. The last piece of forensic evidence they added to the list was the bloody fingerprint found on the partial receipt that was in the car. The fingerprint matched Mobley's, and the partial receipt found in Mobley's house was an identical match to the piece from the car with the fingerprint. Now, I should just add something real quick. Ever since very recently, it does seem like pubic hair or hair follicle comparison is almost like junk science, but this is the 80s and this is what they had to go on. And they did have a lot of additional evidence. Tech Sergeant Gerald Mobley would meet a general court-martial at Bergstrom Air Force Base, Texas, where he faced charges of attempted rape and premeditated murder committed while attempting to perpetrate the offense of rape. The 2 charges were listed in one specification that alleged that Mobley did at Bergstrom Air Force Base, Texas on or about 7 February 1987 with premeditation and while attempting to perpetrate the offense of rape, murder Cynthia Torres by means of strangulation. The trial began on August 19, 1987.
Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities, so do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
The trial began on August 19th, 1987, 6 months after Cynthia was found beaten and bleeding in her car outside of the NCO club. Mobley pled not guilty, and the trial would last 3 weeks. Mobley faced a jury of officers that were made up of 7 men and 1 woman. During opening statements, the lead prosecuting attorney, Major Richard Sarver, acknowledged they did not have a single eyewitness to the crime. He went on to explain that they would rely on what he called very damaging circumstantial evidence. According to Major Sarver, the evidence would point the finger of guilt as sure as if the victim were alive to identify her killer herself. Piece by piece, prosecutors presented the physical evidence that had been gathered at the scene in the parking lot, as well as at Mobley's home in California. 23 witnesses testified for the prosecution, including Cynthia's husband, Edward, who attested that he found her lying in her own blood with her neck crushed. Investigators later testified that despite his denial, Mobley had multiple interactions with Cynthia during his temporary assignment to Bergstrom. He cashed several checks at the NCO club, including one on the very night of Cynthia's attack, February 7th, when she was still working. Testimony from people who attended a barbecue with Mobley on the afternoon of February 7th noted that he didn't have a single scratch on his face. They told the court that they noticed scratches on him the following day. This, of course, disputed Mobley's statement to investigators that he got the scratches while he was playing basketball prior to February 7th. People also testified that after Cynthia's murder, Mobley's personality changed after the attack. The pathologist who performed Cynthia's autopsy testified at the court-martial, and he used several pictures to show the injuries that Cynthia sustained. One of them was a very graphic view of her open throat cavity. Along with the picture of Cynthia's throat was a picture of her excised hyoid bone, which was fractured on the left side. In the pathologist's opinion, the amount of internal hemorrhaging he saw in Cynthia's throat was the worst he had seen in over 1,500 autopsies he had ever performed. There weren't any pictures of the dissection of Cynthia's skull, but the pathologist graphically described how the human head reacts to blows striking it from different directions. He explained how Cynthia's skull injuries were caused by extreme force from different directions. He compared the blows to her head to a tetherball being violently hit back and forth. The pathologist also gave a graphic description of how the scalp was removed and flopped over the face so that he could examine the skull. It was very graphic, y'all. Right after the pathologist testified about the skull injuries, one of the jury members actually fainted, causing the judge to call a recess. The jury was found to be suffering from a condition that made him susceptible to fainting at the sight of blood or injury. Google tells me that it's called vasovagal syncope. Yep, I'm not a doctor, didn't say that right. And I'm going to sleep well at night. A physician recommended that the juror be excused from continuing to participate in the trial. After the prosecution was done with their case, the defense did not put Mobley on the stand, nor did they present a single witness during the entire trial. They did attempt to have some physical evidence suppressed. The main item of evidence that the defense wanted to suppress was Cynthia Torres' car. You see, the car was the crime scene, right? And Mobley's defense team based their objection on the car being released to Edward Torres, Cynthia's husband. And the car was released to him on February 25th. If you remember, the 25th was the same day that Mobley was charged with Cynthia's murder. The defense claimed, hey, we haven't had a proper opportunity to do our own examination of the car because y'all released it to the victim's husband. Well, the motion was overturned by the judge after the prosecution argued that there were no requirements or standard procedure for the police to notify a defendant or their representatives upon release of evidence. During closing arguments, a technique used by trial counsel was to ask various rhetorical questions and then answer the questions themselves based off of the evidence that had been presented. Myrtle actually included a big chunk of this closing argument for me to read, but it's a little bit uncomfortable, so I'm not going to read it. The closing argument contained in part, quote, "There's no way to make death pretty. There's just no way to make things pretty when you find a woman who is left swimming in her own gore. None. But Sergeant Mobley is now off down the road. He's made a commitment. He's decided that he'll take what Cynthia wouldn't give him. He's decided to shut her up permanently, and now he's inside her car. Now, here, Sergeant Mobley is where I can't figure out what you did next. She's on the seat unconscious, semi-conscious. Anyway, as the prosecution continues with his closing argument, he continues to use Sergeant Mobley, and it's almost like he's looking at Sergeant Mobley and asking him specific questions. Like, Sergeant Mobley, I'm not sure why you raped her. You had her there. She's unconscious. You got her panties off. You got her pantyhose down. Why didn't you rape her? Was it because she scratched you? Was it because it hurt? Was it because she had urinated on herself? And he's looking at Sergeant Mobley as he's asking these questions, almost as if in a cross-examination. The prosecution continued this line of closing arguments until he was done. When it was the defense's turn to give their own closing argument, well, instead they moved for a mistrial. Captain David Nix stated, quote, "At this point, the defense requests this court grant a mistrial based upon improper argument. I did not object during Captain Murphy's argument because, of course, the regulation under which we live, AFR 111-1, provides that you should not object during argument. And if my objection were not sustained, I didn't want it to be a position of attempting to derail Captain Murphy's argument in any way," end quote. The defense counsel continued, quote, "What we had here were repeated assertions, repeatedly calling attention to the fact that Sergeant Mobley did not testify by his repeated rhetorical questions to him. His conduct was improper. We therefore now state our objection to trial counsel's closing argument and move for a mistrial based upon that argument," end quote. Well, the judge had a lot to think about. But in the end, the judge denied the motion for mistrial, finding that the rhetorical questions asked by the prosecution were just that, rhetorical. The judge determined that the questions were not asked in a way that drew attention to the fact that the defendant did not testify in his own defense. Another motion made by the defense was to sever the charges of rape and murder, stating that they were duplicitous specifications. What does that mean? According to the Manual for Court-Martials, a duplicitous specification is one which alleges two or more separate offenses in one specification. Usually you have one crime per specification, not two in one. Well, the judge ruled that the two offenses were multiplicious and emphasized to the jury that they must consider one offense, but that's only for sentencing purposes. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and 15 minutes before returning a unanimous decision of guilty. They found him guilty of attempted rape and premeditated murder while attempting to commit a rape. With a unanimous decision in this case, it subjected Mobley to a capital sentence, aka the death penalty. Mobley masked any emotion he may have felt when the verdict was read by the senior officer on the jury. When asked if he had any comments on the verdict, Mobley replied no. The sentencing phase began immediately with Mobley facing either the death penalty or life in prison for his crime. Now, military court-martials are a little bit different in that you have your fully litigated trial immediately followed by sentencing. The prosecution had put 23 witnesses and experts on the stand during the duration of the trial. The defense put 0, none, zilch. They did not present not one single witness during the trial. But during the sentencing phase, the defense brought forward 18 witnesses who testified to the character of Tech Sergeant Gerald Mobley. His sister, Charlotte Eason, sobbed to the panel, quote, "Please don't take my brother's life. He's a good person who took good care of us when we were growing up," end quote. Another sister, Veronica Mobley, said, quote, "There is a lot of good in my brother. "We need our brother. I love my brother," end quote. Others who testified included fellow service members, Mobley's parents who testified via videotape due to poor health, his wife and children, and childhood friends from the neighborhood he grew up in. Mobley's mother, Hattie, she made a statement which included a description of, quote, "a perfect young man whom you can look back upon and admire. Jerry's not a violent type person. He was a very happy child. He had a goal in life to complete. His goal was to have a nice car and to have for his kids a nice family environment," end quote. Hattie and other members of Mobley's family testified that he had been like another parent to his 6 brothers and sisters. As the oldest brother, he had to watch his siblings and even some neighborhood kids while both his parents worked. Mobley's father, Daniel, also testified saying that his son was a self-made man who would do anything for his 5 sisters. He said, quote, "I would support my son in every way. I only wish I could support him more. I've loved him from the moment he was born. I love him now, and I will love him forever," end quote. Mobley's 3 daughters also testified via video saying how much they missed their father and how he writes to them often from jail. While Mobley had been stoic through the entire trial phase, he openly cried and wiped away tears during his loved one's testimonies at sentencing. A longtime friend, Alfred Reams, said, quote, "To this day, everyone in our community loves and respects him. He's been a positive role model who has always been there for his family and friends," end quote. The lead prosecutor, Major Sarver, cross-examined Mr. Reams, asking, quote, "Do you respect rapists? Do you respect a man who attempts to rape a woman and then strangles her?" End quote. Defense attorney Captain Nix acknowledged that Cynthia's death was senseless and said, quote, "We all feel sympathy for her and her family and her children, but nothing we can do will bring her back. No man is all bad. No man is all good. I know of no man who does not need mercy from time to time. Cynthia Torres is beyond that mercy. Gerald Mobley now needs that mercy," end quote. Nix went on to say that Mobley's children needed their father alive. But I'm 100% sure that Cynthia's children also wanted the same thing for themselves. The prosecution had 2 rebuttal witnesses that were called. One of them was Staff Sergeant Paul Erickson, who was Mobley's subordinate at George Air Force Base. Erickson stated, quote, "As a supervisor on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, I'd give him a 2. My opinion was that he was a liar and you couldn't trust him," end quote. The second witness, who wasn't named in the news articles that we read, was also a member of the Air Force and also testified that Mobley could not be trusted. The jury returned the sentence and announced that Mobley would receive the minimum sentence, which was life in prison. No death penalty. Turns out his life was spared. Along with the prison sentence, Mobley was reduced in rank to Airman Basic, and as a reminder, he was a tech sergeant or an E6 before his conviction. He also received a dishonorable discharge, and initially it included the forfeitures of all pay and allowances, but the convening authority approved the sentence except for the pay forfeiture that he reduced to $300 per month for 16 months. And that's probably to help Mobley's family out. Jury member Captain Mahala Sawyer told the Austin American-Statesman that Mobley's service record and citations for his service were crucial in keeping him off death row. She was quoted as saying, quote, "Perhaps he can be rehabilitated in prison. It's always difficult when someone's life is at stake," end quote. Mobley's verdict and sentence were automatically reviewed by then Commander of 12th Air Force Lieutenant General Merrill McPeak, who would later gain a 4th star and serve as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. General McPeak approved of the trial's outcome. The first appeal began in 1989. The defense team brought up 8 separate points that they felt were presented and decided on in error during the original trial. The appeals court determined that 3 of the 8 points merited discussions. The first was the release of Cynthia's car to Edward Torres on February 25, 1987, without notice to the defense. While the court agreed that the car was the crime scene, they were not able to find any precedents that required police to preserve a crime scene until representatives of the defense team were able to examine it. They felt that a rule like that would be extremely impractical, pointing out that while in this case the suspect was identified pretty fast, In other cases, that isn't always the case. The motion was denied. The second point the defense wanted the court to examine was the pictures that were shown to the jury that graphically showed Cynthia's injuries, specifically the view of her open neck cavity and exposed skull. The appeals court determined that the photo of Cynthia's neck cavity was relevant to Mobley's intent and premeditation of the crime. However, they conceded that the pictures of her exposed skull were unnecessary, and the extreme force used when Mobley inflicted the injuries could have just been explained verbally. Despite their comments on the skull pictures, the appeals court determined that the judge in the court-martial did not abuse his discretion in allowing the photos and that the defendant did not suffer prejudice over their admission. They also noted that their opinion about the skull photographs was not because one of the jurors had fainted. The final point that the appeals court broke down was the actual charges. If you remember, the two crimes were lumped together within one specification. The specification read in part that he did at Bergstrom Air Force Base, Texas, on or about 7 February 87, with premeditation and while attempting to perpetrate the offense of rape, murder Cynthia Torres by means of strangulation. During the trial, the defense team argued that the charges were incorrectly grouped into one specification and should have been two separate specifications. The judge during trial had overruled that objection, but on appeal, they dug into it, citing several opinions that enforced the prosecution's decision to go forward with the trial with the two crimes under one specification. I love the language that these court opinions are written in. The decision was rendered as follows, quote, "Appellate Government Counsel have invited our attention to the excellent brief on the duplicity issue which was submitted by trial counsel. On the strength of the authorities cited therein and other authorities revealed in the course of our own research, it appears that pleading two theories of murder in one specification is consistent with a well-established precedent in civilian and military case law. We conclude that the military judge's ruling was correct." End quote. All in all, the United States Air Force Court of Military Review's final decision was delivered on September 2nd. They found that all appeal points that were filed against the original trial were correct in law and fact, and found no error prejudicial to the rights of the accused. Mobley would stay in prison for the crimes as charged and as convicted. They did, however, adjust the specification and deleted the words, quote, "and while attempting to perpetrate the offense of rape," end quote. Since the mandatory minimum punishment was confinement for life for a charge of premeditated murder, there would be no adjustments to Mobley's sentence. Mobley's case went before the United States Court of Military Appeals next in 1990. This appeal found that of the 4 issues filed, one was argued well enough to overturn the decision of the Air Force Court of Military Review. The appellate court dismissed 3 of the points, but one stood out to them and they wanted to talk about it. They felt that it required a deeper examination. Their concerns were with the third point about Mobley not testifying on his own behalf and the trial counsel pointing that out. The appeals court overturned the Air Force Court of Military Appeals decision on that point and sent it back to the lower court with 4 specific questions. The Air Force Court of Military Appeals investigated the 4 questions and returned their findings to the United States Court of Military Appeals in September of 1990. The final decision was filed in December of 1991. They did not find prejudicial error and did not reverse the decision of the original trial court and determined that the verdict of guilty and the sentence of life in prison would stay in effect. Things in this particular case were quiet for the next 21 years when something appeared on the change.org website in 2012. One of Mobley's sisters, identified on the site as T. Jean, started a petition for her brother's release, claiming that Mobley had a letter from the Air Force indicating he had received clemency. A copy of the letter was posted to the website, but it's extremely blurry and basically impossible to read. The letter looked like it was folded and kept in a pocket for a very long time with deep creases and a tear in the paper. The petition claims that Mobley was given the letter from the Department of the Air Force Clemency and Parole Board back in May of 2003. The sister stated that Mobley had been considered and approved for clemency, but the family wondered why he had never been released or why no action had ever been taken. The petition was requesting a compassionate release or pardon based on Mobley's heavy depression and mental and physical health deterioration while in prison. The petition outlined Mobley's career, saying he was drafted into the Army after graduating high school in 1971, but that he decided to enlist in the Air Force instead. He received an honorable discharge in 1977, but re-enlisted the next year, serving for another 10 years as an aircraft environmental systems specialist before he attempted to rape and then murdered Cynthia Torres. The petition had 51 supporters, and 16 people had added comments on the change.org website. Most of the comments were made by Mobley's families, including his mother Hattie, but there was one comment logged under Decision Maker Response that claimed to be the Air Force Clemency and Parole Board and was posted on December 5th, 2012. It stated, quote, "I do not recommend clemency. Please remove me from this spam email. I have asked this already," end quote. There's no email associated with the comment, and there's no way to validate if someone from the actual Clemency and Parole Board actually made the comment, which I probably don't believe they would go on change.org and make a comment like that. Another comment left by a dissenter was filled with powerful words. It read, quote, "I realize this is 2 years late. I just found this information and needed to comment. I knew this felon, Mobley, and he deserves to be right where he is. When he was stationed at Hurlburt Field in Florida in the early 80s, he tried to rape me and a friend. I knew his wife, Barbara, and their 2 daughters. I thought he was a friend and trusted this felon. We went to the same church and he was a deacon there. This church consisted of mostly military people. This felon is a deceitful liar and should never be released. I know his friends and family think they know this man, but they do not. There is a dark side to this felon, and he showed his true side when they finally caught him. He is by no means innocent. By the way, I did attempt to report him to the police, but they did not follow up, and then I was convinced by the church pastor not to continue with my charges because of the harm it would do his career and his family. Now, look what happened. A leopard cannot change its spots. His true nature was revealed and an innocent young woman lost her life. I and my friend have been in counseling for years for what that felon did to us. So no, by the grace of God, I pray that felon is never released. Signed, victim of this horrible felon," end quote. According to the Bureau of Prisons Inmate Finder, Gerald Mobley died on August 8, 2021, at the age of 68. As always, I like to end the episode by talking about the victim. Who was Cynthia Torres? Cynthia Ann Woolley was born on June 23, 1961, and was only 25 years old when she died of her injuries on February 9, 1987. Cynthia moved to Carlsbad, New Mexico when she was just 6 years old, and she lived there until 1983. During her time in Carlsbad, Cynthia attended Bethel Christian School and was active in the Bethel Baptist Church. When she was 22 years old, she moved to Albuquerque. I was unable to find anything that said when and how she and Edward met, but Edward had been stationed at Bergstrom in May of 1986. At the time of her death, Cynthia had been working at the club for only 5 months. Cynthia's obituary listed 2 children, a son and a daughter, that lived in Albuquerque. Besides her husband Edward, she was survived by a brother and her parents. Cynthia's services were held on Saturday, February 15, 1987, followed by interment in the Sunset Memorial Park in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A memorial fund was established in her name with the funds earmarked for assistance programs for victims of violent crime or their family members. As per usual, please keep your case recommendations coming, as that is really the only way I've been picking which cases to cover nowadays. Shout out to my girl Myrtle for researching and writing today's episode. She has officially assisted me with over 40 cases. Also, my grandma scolded me this week and asked me why I haven't posted a YouTube video in close to a year, and I literally gasped out loud. I had no idea that Abuela was watching me on YouTube. But alas, I am hopeful to get my act together this year and start making video content. So if you want to be the first to know if and when I ever post a video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel at Mama Margot, and that's MAMAMARGOT. My sources for this episode include articles in the Austin American Statesman, Carlsbad Courant-Argus, the San Bernardino County Sun, the Marshall News Messenger, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, a whole bunch of court appeals, Find a Grave, Change.org, and the Bureau of Prisons Inmate Locator. Military Murder was created by Mama Margot Productions. This episode was executive produced by Myrtle, Falcon 13, and Jen. My newest associate producers are Brianna and Sundine, and my newest assistant producer is Jamie. The music was created by Tyops. If you're interested in supporting the show, be sure to check me out at patreon.com/militarymurder. Or you can check me out at Apple Premium, where for as little as $5 a month, you get access to over 40 full-length episodes. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next week.
I was working on our podcast.